Welcome back to another video. I thought I'd have a look at a vintage lens today. This is the Minolta autofocus 100 to 200mm f4.5. This was released back in 1987 and it's on A mount. I've put all the details on the screen for you, and it was originally released as a more affordable alternative to the Minolta 70 to 210 f4. I've also converted the price to a modern currency as well, so it wasn't an expensive lens. This has a zooming mechanism where the barrel extends, unlike the Beercan, which has an internal mechanism, and I personally never found a problem with any zoom creep on this lens. Aperture is controlled by a spring mechanism on this tab, and it should snap back into place very quickly. If you have a lens where it's very slow, it's possible that the iris blades on the diagram have got contaminated, and the camera controls the aperture via a motor and a ring here. So that's how it works, rather than the older Rocker or MD lenses where the aperture is on the lens, the ring. Just extending it out now, you see the elements moving forward. We have 5 contact points on this, and it's a screw driven lens as they were back in the day. You can see it rotating around here, so the camera body drives the focus on this lens. There's no built-in motors on the Minolta lenses back in this era. Unfortunately though, when you do focus either manually or automatically, it does rotate the filter ring, so it's not ideal if you're going to be using something like a circular polarizer. Typical Minolta coatings for the period, you have a very dark magenta. The lens cap that comes with these lenses, the original ones, you have to take that off before you can take the hood off. It's just a quirk of the design, and then this hood is a snap-on hood rather than a bayonet mount, and I personally think it works quite well. It's quicker and easier to use than the bayonet mount hoods. A lot of these lenses that are around second hand are very inexpensive, but a lot of them don't come with a hood, so if you get one without a hood, it's possibly worth investing in one, even if it's a screw-in one for the front filter. Quick look at the focus distance window. This will show you your focusing from infinity right the way down to its closest focus. The close focus on this lens isn't that great. I will cover that a bit later on. But if you compare it to the 70 to 210 f4, it is significantly smaller. There is a big difference in weight and size, despite the fact they cover almost a similar focal range. And even comparing it to a modern lens like the 17 to 50 Tamron, it's only slightly taller than that. Mounting it to a film body now, you can see its rotation clockwise snaps into place, and the focus speeds on this are actually quite good, but that will depend on the body that you're using. I find it a little bit quicker than the Beercan, which is the 70 to 210 f4. That's my experience with the lens. Now we get on to some photographic tests. First one is at 100mm. We do have some pincushion on this lens, and also a bit stronger at 200mm. There's a bit of fall off. It's not heavy though. It's not a significant factor. It's not unusual to have that on a telephoto lens, but the close focus distance isn't that great on this lens at all compared to the Beercan, which gets much closer. So if you're into close-up photography, that is something to consider. Moving on now to some sharpness tests at 100mm wide open at f4.5, and the sharpness is good on this lens across most of the frame. If you're on full frame, the corners will need to be stopped down a little bit. I'm at 150, it's reporting 140 on the EXIF, not sure why it does that, but it does. And the sharpness is again very good, at least in the major area in the middle, and up to 200mm wide open. Perhaps not quite as much contrast, but still plenty of detail there. So this lens, although it covers a short range, is sharp across its focal range wide open. Moving on to some real world tests now outside. 100mm f4.5, and again further focus distance. I'm pretty happy with the details on this lens. Normally for landscape type shots you would be stopping the lens down anyway, but this does give you a bit of an option over your normal zoom, which would have perhaps an f5.6. This is 2/3 of a stop quicker, and it's 1/3 of a stop slower than the Beercan, but that extra light gathering can be useful in marginal situations. And at 200mm the story is repeated again. I find the edge sharpness to be better at 200mm versus the 100, but I'm very happy to use this lens wide open across the focal range from 100 to 200mm. And here's another example, just zooming in wide open again. There is a bit of chromatic aberration. It's not nearly as bad as the Beercan can be, when that can be quite extreme. So I'm not too unhappy with the aberrations on the lens. You won't normally have much of a problem with it. And then moving on to 200mm, the same patterns repeated. I find that the central sharpness not quite as good as the 100, but still very decent for a lens of this type, because you have a restricted focal range. It's not that much, it's only 100mm. The performance across the range, there aren't big compromises that you tend to get with some longer zoom range lenses. Just a touch of aberrations in the highlight areas. Looking at the quality of blur, this is an important factor for some people, and generally speaking it's quite good, at least in the background. It can be a little bit edgy in the foreground, particularly around the highlight edges. You will see some circular effects on the highlight areas sometimes, but the background is quite good. It really depends a lot on the subject that you're shooting, so I took quite a few different shots. This one was quite good. We're at 200mm, and it's quite a smooth transition from the in focus area, which is the plant pot, to the grass blades in the background. It's certainly not edgy and uncomfortable to me. This particular shot was the worst I could get out of the lens in terms of the blur quality, in my opinion. The reason for that is in the foreground we have again that edginess to the out of focus areas, and the chromatic aberration shows its head a bit more in this particular shot. Saying that, this is a sort of shot which perhaps probably wouldn't really take, but I did want to demonstrate the worst potential of the lens as far as the blur. Background's not entirely smooth either. It tends to smooth off once you get further into the picture, and it does vary, but I find that the 200mm really close subjects can sometimes be a bit edgy, but for other shots like this they came out fine. Wide open at f4.5, so quite a smooth transition into the background, particularly with the leaves you can see. So I'm happy enough with that shot. And if we stop down to f5, again very similar, not much difference between the two, and then I'll drop it to f5.6 and then down to f8. Obviously we've increased our depth of field, so in most areas this would get sort of around a 7 out of 10 for me on the quality of the blur. Here's a quick shot outside, someone taking a picture or a selfie, and we're at 100mm f4.5, and I find the background blur is fine on this particular shot, even though it's not massively out of focus. Not really any signs of edginess on that or nervousness. So for most shots I'm happy enough to use this lens. It wouldn't be an ideal choice for portraits for me, but I'm happy enough with the results that I'm getting in terms of the quality of the blur. For this next shot I decided to get the sun into the frame as much as possible and create the worst flare effect, and sure enough we have quite a significant loss of contrast. You can also see the magenta rings going around and the flare hotspots green. Generally speaking it depends how the image is composed, so if you have the sun off to an angle like this it can cause severe problems. Seems to be more common on the older film lenses than modern optics. It's one thing which is worthwhile taking a bit of care and attention with. So there's certainly a drawback on that side. However, when I did this shot directly at the sun, didn't have any problems, just a touch of fringing on the person in the middle, silhouette shot, so I exposed for the sky, and just going to show you a few other shots that I've taken with the lens. Using the lens generally you can be quite restricted with the focal length. It wouldn't be the only lens that I put in the bag, but sometimes if you force yourself into taking compositions at telephoto, it does mean that you're looking for a different type of shots than you'd get with a wider angle lens or one of those super zooms. And you don't have too many compromises in terms of image quality with this lens. It delivers the goods wide open across the focal range. The reason I wanted to have a look at this particular lens is that people are bargain hunting for lenses. They're looking for very inexpensive lenses, and that's partly down to some of the big price increases we've seen in recent years in the photo industry. That includes bodies and lenses. Even standard lenses aren't that cheap anymore, and this lens offers at a very low price some compromises in terms of the optical performance, but in general I think most people will be quite happy with it. It's certainly a sharp lens. Few small points that would put me off with the minimum focus distance, but once you can get over that you get a lens which is going to be a bit faster than a modern optic, It's also quite a small lens, and it's incredibly well built, which you just don't see on lenses of this type anymore. A mixture of high quality plastics and metal. This lens has lasted and should last for quite a few years more. So hopefully that was useful to you if you're thinking about this lens. Do stick around because I will be doing some more vintage lens reviews in future, and thanks very much for watching.